When most people think about growing food, they picture wide-open fields or large backyards with rows of vegetables stretching into the distance. They assume that serious food production requires serious space and that their small yard or tiny patio could never produce enough to make a real difference. This assumption is completely wrong, and it keeps millions of people from growing food who could easily feed themselves with what they already have. The truth is that small spaces can be incredibly productive when you understand how to use them properly. The secret is a technique I call the layering system, and it can help you grow more food in a tiny area than most people harvest from gardens 10 times the size. The layering system is based on a simple observation about how nature grows plants. In a forest, you never see bare ground with plants spaced far apart in neat rows. Instead, you see layers of vegetation stacked on top of each other, filling every available inch of space, from the forest floor to the treetops. Plants of different heights and different growth habits occupy the same ground, each one using resources that the others cannot reach. This vertical stacking is what makes natural systems so productive, and it is exactly what we can replicate in our own gardens, regardless of how small they might be. The first layer in this system is the ground itself. Most gardeners waste enormous amounts of space by leaving soil bare between their plants. They were taught to space vegetables far apart, and they follow those instructions without questioning whether they make sense. But wide spacing was designed for mechanical cultivation, not for maximum production. When you garden by hand, you can plant much more densely and use ground covers to fill every gap. Low-growing crops like lettuce, spinach, and radishes can carpet the soil beneath taller plants, capturing sunlight that would otherwise hit bare dirt and producing food from space that most gardeners ignore completely. The second layer consists of medium-height plants that form the main body of your garden. These are your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and bush beans. In a conventional garden, these plants would each have their own dedicated space with empty ground all around them. In the layering system, they share space with the ground layer below and support structures above. You plant them closer together than traditional spacing suggests, and you let them intermingle with companions that complement rather than compete with each other. The third layer reaches upward, using vertical structures to multiply your growing area. Every wall fence trellis and support post is potential garden space that most people never utilize. Climbing beans can scale a simple string trellis and produce pounds of food from a footprint of just a few square inches. Cucumbers trained up a vertical support take almost no ground space while yielding enough fruit for a family. Squash and melons can climb with a little help, and their heavy fruits can be supported with simple slings made from old cloth. When you think vertically, a 6-foot fence becomes 60 square feet of additional growing area. The fourth layer exists in containers that can be placed anywhere sunlight reaches. Window sills, balcony railings, stair steps, and hanging baskets all become productive garden space when you see them through the lens of the layering system. Herbs thrive in small pots, and a collection of containers can provide all the fresh flavors you need for cooking. Salad greens grow perfectly in shallow boxes that can sit on any flat surface. Even tomatoes and peppers can produce abundantly in 5-gallon buckets placed wherever you have room. The fifth layer involves timing and succession. Space is not just physical, it is also temporal. A bed that grows spring lettuce can grow summer beans and then fall brassicas using the same ground 3 times in a single year. Quick maturing crops like radishes can be tucked between slower growing plants and harvested before competition becomes an issue. By thinking about time as another dimension of your garden, you effectively multiply your growing area without adding a single square foot of ground. I learned these principles out of necessity when I moved to a home with almost no yard. The previous property had given me room to spread out, and I had grown accustomed to wasting space without realizing it. Suddenly, I had only a small patio and a narrow strip of ground along the fence. My first reaction was despair. I thought my food growing days were over. But constraints have a way of forcing creativity, and what I developed in that tiny space ended up producing more food per square foot than my old sprawling garden ever had. The transformation began when I installed a simple trellis system along my fence. I used inexpensive metal conduit and garden twine to create a wall of vertical growing space about 12 feet long and 6 feet tall. On this structure, I grew pole beans, cucumbers, and small melons, training them upward as they grew. The ground beneath the trellis was too shaded for fruiting crops, but perfect for lettuce and spinach, which actually prefer some protection from intense sun. That single fence line produced more food than many traditional garden beds, while taking up almost no horizontal space. Next, I added containers wherever I could fit them. Large pots held tomato plants on my sunny patio. Medium containers grew peppers and eggplants along the edge of the concrete. Small pots of herbs lined my kitchen windowsill so I could snip fresh basil and parsley while cooking. Hanging baskets held trailing cherry tomatoes that cascaded down and produced fruit all summer long. Every surface that received sunlight became potential garden space, and I filled them all. The ground-level strip along my fence received the most intensive planting. I abandoned all conventional spacing guidelines and instead planted as densely as the plants would tolerate. Lettuce seedlings went in just 4 inches apart. Carrot seeds were broadcast thickly rather than planted in rows. Radishes filled every gap between larger plants. The result looked chaotic compared to a traditional garden, but the production was remarkable. That narrow strip yielded more salad greens than I could eat, and I was harvesting something almost every day throughout the growing season. Timing became my secret weapon for maximizing this limited space. I started seeds indoors, so transplants were ready the moment a gap opened in the garden. When I pulled a head of lettuce, I immediately planted something else in its place. Cool season crops gave way to warm season crops, which gave way to fall plantings in a continuous flow of production. The garden was never static, never resting, never wasting time with empty soil. Every day something was growing, and every week something was being harvested. The yields from this tiny space shocked me when I actually tracked them. In a single season, I harvested over 200 pounds of vegetables from an area that most people would consider too small to bother with. The diversity was remarkable, including tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, beans, lettuce, spinach, carrots, radishes, herbs, and more. My grocery store vegetable purchases dropped to nearly zero during the growing season, and I had enough to share with neighbors who could not believe what I was producing from such a small area. The layering system works because it eliminates the wasted space that characterizes most gardens. Traditional approaches leave gaps between plants, gaps between rows, and gaps in time when nothing is growing. These gaps add up quickly, and they represent lost production that you never recover. When you layer plants vertically, pack them densely, horizontally, and succession plant continuously through time, you capture resources that would otherwise go unused. Sunlight that hits bare ground is sunlight wasted. The layering system ensures that every ray of light hits a leaf that can convert it into food. There are some adjustments required when growing this intensively. Water and nutrients get used up faster when plants are packed tightly, so you need to irrigate more frequently and feed the soil generously with compost and organic matter. Air circulation can be reduced in dense plantings, so choosing disease-resistant varieties becomes more important. Harvesting requires more attention because ripe produce can hide among the foliage. But these minor challenges are far outweighed by the dramatic increase in production that the layering system provides. I also discovered that intensive planting creates its own pest management benefits. The diversity of crops confuses insects that would otherwise find their target plants easily. The dense foliage provides habitat for beneficial predators like spiders and ground beetles. The continuous harvesting removes damaged leaves and fruits before problems can spread. My tiny layered garden had fewer pest issues than my old spacious one because the ecosystem was more balanced and resilient. The financial returns from this approach are significant, especially when you factor in the value of the space being used. A patio that costs money in property taxes and produces nothing can become a productive asset that saves hundreds of dollars in grocery bills every year. A fence that serves only as a boundary can become a vertical farm that feeds your family. When you calculate the value of food produced per square foot, the layering system outperforms almost any other use of residential land. If you have been holding back from growing food because you think you lack space, I want you to reconsider that assumption. Look at your surroundings with fresh eyes and ask where sunlight falls. Every sunny surface is potential garden space waiting to be activated. The walls, the fences, the railings, the steps, the windowsills are all opportunities that most people overlook. The layering system shows you how to use them all, and the results will transform what you thought was possible in your small space. Start this season with just one vertical structure or a few containers, and watch how quickly your confidence grows alongside your harvest. The abundance waiting in your tiny space is real and achievable, and it begins the moment you decide to see your limitations as opportunities instead of obstacles. Your small space is not a barrier. It is an invitation to garden smarter, and the layering system is the key that unlocks its full potential for you and your family.